It's October. You know what that means. Midnight's dropping within the fucking month? Like, who is screaming? Hi, welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. If you have been a subscriber for a more extended period of time to this channel, first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And second of all, I haven't really been posting that regularly, and for that I'm sorry. I've just been fucking slammed with, like, work, and it's crazy. Also, I'm obviously in a different location if, again, you regularly watch my videos, because I'm in Massachusetts now, so, and not in St. Louis, and will be for the foreseeable future. And so this is the new setup, I guess. I feel like I always have to preface my videos with, like, this is my new setup, if I do have a new setup, because aesthetics are very important to me. if you can't tell. Oh, speaking of, I forgot to reapply my lip gloss. Must do that. As I've just now mentioned, I'm very busy, so I actually have to, like, leave within, like, 15 minutes because I have to go to something. Oh, God. And that just means that usually my wrap-ups take, like, an hour to film because I just talk and talk and talk for so long about these books. And I think I've read, like, 23 books in the month of September. Because this is my, yeah, by the way, this is my September wrap-up. And yeah, so the other issue with, like, the filming situation is that the lighting is not ideal. So I was really trying to figure out the best setup, and for a few weeks I was just, like, not knowing how to best do it. But if this is okay with y'all, yeah, we'll play around with some options, I guess. We'll see. But anyways, this will probably be split into a couple parts. Hopefully the lighting is still okay when I get back. We'll fucking see. Oh my god. But let's just get into the books I read last month. I read a good mix of genres, as I usually do, and it was some thriller, some horror, some short story collections, and some nonfiction, I would say, and, like, some literary fiction, I think, but that's sort of what we're working with. So, as usual, I'm going to go through these in the order that I read them. So, the first book that I read in the month of September was actually a book that I talked about at the end of my last month's wrap-up, which I have a playlist that these videos are always on, and I'll link it in the cards. But at the very end of that video, I talk about the beautiful one, Sylvia Moreno Garcia, which I have a physical copy of back in St. Louis. And I talk about, like, being in the middle of it, or towards the end in that video. And I think I stand by everything that I said there. Like, I loved it. I thought it was such a beautifully wrought love story. Like, it takes a lot for me to really enjoy a straight, like, love triangle situation with, like, a very, like, Regency romance type. Also, okay, with this whole setting, like, I have a mini fridge right there, and then I also have a radiator that's, like, so fucking loud right behind the mic that just turns on and rattles for whatever reason at any random point. So if the audio is a little different or fucked up, so sorry. Anyways. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It just thoroughly entranced me the whole time. But anyways, watch that video if you haven't already. But the book that I read right after that, which was, like, technically the second book that I read, was The Goddess of Filth by Castro. This is, like, a short horror novella about this group of Latina girls in, I think, Texas. And they sort of do, like, a seance or something like that. They, like, use an Ouija board or something like that on a night celebrating their graduation or something along those lines. Classic teenage sleepover girl friend group story that, you know, then leads into and escalates into a horror story. But basically there's, like, a demon possession situation of one of the girls who's, like, a high-achieving, like, Ivy League bound student whose parents are very strict and religious, and it's sort of about the way that everything folds out as they understand more of, like, the indigenous spirituality and mysticism behind the actual possession that's going on, as well as the other forces of, like, the priest that's in town. And we jump between some perspectives. I think the main perspective we're in is a character who's not the girl who's being possessed necessarily, but one of the friends in the girls' friend group, and she is an older sister who works at, like, a Sonic or something, and she feels like a bit of a disappointment and not as high achieving or pretty as, like, her friends. She's very, like, badass and, like, bold and forthright, and I think that this book is written in a very, like, simplistic way. That's something that I find very common in, like, the horror thriller genre. I feel like the writing is less substantial, and I don't know, maybe that's an overgeneralization, like, it definitely is, but whatever. That's just something I think I like picked up on over the years in terms of reading this type of book, but I still think that the ideas and the actual way that the storyline played out was interesting and fun, although the characters just like, they were pretty two-dimensional in the way that I feel like, again, this type of genre sort of lends itself to, especially with like this short of a character limit, because it's like a novella. But yeah, I think that the way that the story played out, like the actual plot and narrative and the horror part, the demon possession part, that narrative gets like turned on its head. It was really fun to like read and experience as, you know, as a reader. So yeah, I rated it 3 stars. I thought it was solid, but definitely not like amazing, I would say. But I think it's something that if you're looking for like a young adult solid like possession story with like a feminist, I think it was like, it's like a Mayan goddess sort of possession situation, I think this would work for you. Okay, the next book that I read was Fruiting Bodies Stories by Kathryn Harlan. This book is a short story collection that I thoroughly enjoyed. I think I rated it 4 stars or maybe 4.5. It is such a like queer, like lesbian sort of collection of fairy tale like stories that convey such a feeling of like sentiment that is still very uniquely wrought through like magical realism and fantasy elements. I think my favorite stories in here are definitely the one that I think the titular story is Fruiting Bodies, and it's about this lesbian couple that live out in the middle of the woods, and one of the couple, the femme one, it's unsaid, but I think it's a pretty femme butch dynamic. The femme one has mushrooms that grow out of her body, and it's like a cancerous sort of growth, but in order for them to not be seen as objects of science, to be, you know, taken apart and discovered, they hide off in the middle of nowhere. But basically this man stumbles upon them who's like a injured hiker, and this sort of disrupts their routine, and we sort of see what happens in that. That was a really, really good story that I thoroughly enjoyed. There's another story about an anthropologist who stumbles upon like a trading den gambling situation of fae under like a bridge or something, and she starts observing them and taking notes to sort of write a book about, you know, the anthropology of how the trades work, and she sort of sees the few other mortals who are in this, tied into this fairyland world of like very dark and gruesome trades where you can like give up your 3 fingers in order to bet on the table when you're playing this game, or you can give up your memory of your first kiss, or you can give up, you know, your dancing skills, and whoever wins that round takes everything that's on the table and like whatever, and like it's not whether you want it or not, like, you know, you get it. And we sort of see from her perspective things as they play out, and it's fascinating. So, and the first story I think is about like changelings and these young girls who are good friends, and how one of them is, I think, an adoptive child, but that because her parents like struggled with fertility issues, but then finally her mother is able to like get pregnant, and so the friend of this little girl is like, the baby's gonna be a changeling, and it's about like that dynamic. So I think there's a lot of like focus on queer dynamics and relationships and like female friendship and like family in a way that I found really tightly and like compactly told in a way that was like I really enjoyed. And those were sort of the standout stories to me, I would say. And the next book that I read was another sort of like feminist queer sort of fairy tale like short story collection called Salt Slow by Julia Armfield, and I rated this like 4 stars. Maybe it's more of a 3.5 for me because the stories are less memorable for me, but they're all still very, I would say like the writing was very good, and the different landscapes that we get taken on, like whether that be a post-apocalyptic like island type story of a couple surviving, or whether that be a woman whose like boyfriend is very hated by her downstairs neighbor and stuff like that. So I would say in some ways it might be less like there's fewer. I guess this might be an inaccurate generalization, but I'm not sure, or this might be an inaccurate conclusion, but I think there's like more like hetero sort of dynamics portrayed in Salt Slow, but it's still a very like, I think it's still quite novel in its like usage of form and character and storytelling. The next book that I read was a psychological thriller type book called Stay Awake by Megan Goldin. I rated this 3 stars. I thought it was kind of mid, but, you know, solid enough. It's about this woman who, like, wakes up with, like, a knife in her pocket, and at the front doorstep of what she thinks is her apartment, she walks in, and the couple that lives there is like, this is not your apartment, and she's so confused, and she looks at her hands, and it just says Stay Awake on her hands. And everything that, like, unfolds and plays out, it's a lot of, like, playing with, obviously, like, an unreliable narrator / main character. It was interesting and fast-paced while I was reading it. It's set in New York City as well, and we kind of see her go through this landscape, and, like, there's some touchstones of things that but, like, we as a reader read and remember everything that she experiences, but every time she wakes up, she does not remember whatever she experienced last. And it's the way that everything plays out, it's, like, not as necessarily, like, twisty as much as the things that get revealed to us just, you know, progressively get revealed. And I think, like, the ending was a bit, in some ways, kind of silly, but it's whatever. It was fine, you know. I rated it 3 stars. Like, it was fine enough. It was solid, you know. It's a thriller. The next book that I read was Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn, which I rated 5 stars. And, you know, maybe it's more of a 4.5. Honestly, I don't know where I stand on this rating anymore, but, like, when I finished it, I was like, this is a 5-star book, because it just brought me so much joy while I was reading it, because it's about these, like, these 4 women who were trained as assassins. They were, like, plucked out from, you know, their various college institutions and trained by this woman who was a, like, lead sniper during World War II or something, and, like, they get trained under her to be, like, ruthless, cunning, like, badass killing machines, essentially. And then now they're all, like, older, and they get sent on like, one last mission, and then they're like, wait, the museum is, like, where they were employed, and what is the assassination company that they work for. And the reason why it exists is because, like, the lore behind it is that after World War II, they were still trying to eradicate Nazis that had, like, fled or hidden away. And so basically these women are like, wait, the museum, like, our employers low-key are trying to kill us, like, what's going on? And some of them have been, like, out of the game for a while. Like, one of them is a lesbian and married to a woman who, like, has no clue about her history or this, like, career that she has. One of them is grieving the loss of her husband, who died in the past few years. And our main character, the one who we're in the perspective in mind of, she is a very interesting character who, like, really, at the expense of, like, her own personal life and emotional life and relationships, prioritized her career her whole life. And she's very funny and acerbic and witty. All of them are elements of what keeps their whole dynamic together, but I really like the tone and the perspective that we take on in her point of view. I liked this a lot. I think that the way that things unfold and how things reveal themselves and how the institution of, like, the museum is portrayed was so fascinating and so fun. Such a wild romp. I love stories about older women. I love stories about women who do crazy shit and are killers and kill bad men, and who are underestimated because they're women of a certain age, so they're irrelevant, right? Okay, I really do have to head out now, but I will be back, and hopefully I'll look either similar, and the setup will be similar, or yeah, we'll both fucking see, you know? Okay, I'm back, and obviously I look different, so yeah, the lighting wasn't as good when I came back, but we fucking move. Also, I just counted, and I read 24 books in the month of September, but a lot of them were, like, individual comics and shorter books, so yeah, it wasn't, like, a lot of, like, full length, longer novels, I would say. Also, I've noticed now that I'm, like, a bit into filming, my energy levels are probably very different between these 2 clips. I'm just kind of, like, more tired and, like, chill today, so if I'm not as energetic as I was in the previous clip, that's why. You know, I have range, I'm a Gemini stellium, you know. Last time I filmed, we were at the tail end of Mercury retrograde, and now we're out of it. So I'm a bit less, I think, like, frazzled and energetic. So that's why I'm talking like this. If you've noticed the vibe shift, the vibrational, the energy, change. Anyways, the next book that I read was Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney, which I rated 4 stars. I thought this was a solid thriller, mystery thriller, sort of. It is following this family reunion for a will reading on this island, and it's very British. It's like it's like on a dark and stormy night sort of vibe. Basically, the people start dying one by one of this family of the people who are gathered there. It's almost like a locked room mystery, like who could be the one doing the murders. And it's also very much about like trauma and family history and violence and their dark pasts, or also like the things that have held them back from being able to be a good family to each other. And yeah, I thought it was pretty solid. I liked the twist. I liked the way that it was drawn out. It very much felt like a British, like, Knives Out, but not from the perspective of an outsider, but rather from the perspective of one of the people, like, on the inside, if that makes sense. That's not the investigation of the aftermath. It's more of like as it's going, as we progress through the night and people start dying one by one. And they die under different circumstances, but every time they die, there's like a bit of a poem or something that, like a rhyme that appears on like the wall or like nearby. And we also go back in time and like remember different things about the relationship between these sisters. And yeah, it's very much about like family dynamics and that sense of like atmosphere of being this like stormy island for like 24 hours is very, very strong, I would say. The next book that I read was Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women by Sylvia Federici. I read her book Caliban and the Witch like I think earlier this year, and it was phenomenal. I loved it so much. It was so good. And this book is sort of like a continuation of it or an elaboration of it from like the 21st century. And because Caliban and the Witch was written in like the 90s, I think. And this book is written in sometime in the 2020s or 2010s, I think. And so it's sort of like a more of a shorter like pamphlet type thing, like 100 pages or so, that sort of delves into contemporary global realities of why and how international capitalist and imperialist entities have been driving the patriarchal oppression of women and like femicide and accusations of witchcraft that are part of a larger, obviously like misogynistic, like violent world order, and how that's like fundamentally interlinked with like how capitalism operates and the delineation and connection to the history of that previously. So yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Not as enlightening as Caliban and the Witch, like obviously, because it's not as long and it's a continuation of it, but it was still pretty solid. And I think like the examples that she provides are very compelling, and obviously like a lot of the arguments that she's making are very strong. And so yeah, I would recommend it. The next book that I read was Abolition, Feminism Now, which is by various authors, I believe. Shorter compilation of texts that sort of interconnect the relationship between the capitalist sort of like prison industrial complex and like the racism behind that, and the patriarchal like violence against women and women's oppression. And it also is very much rooted in the present. Like it's very much a discussion of and a collection of and organizing that was going on during the beginning of COVID and like ongoing. I think it was more like generic and also specific to the individual narratives and experiences of some of the like writers and women who are contributing to this book. But I also think that the larger points that it was making were really crucial and essential to understanding a lot of like the key points around how like abolition conceptually and also feminism conceptually are like interlinked and fundamentally tied to each other. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It's pretty solid, and also I think a good introduction to any sort of feminist or abolitionist or even like anti-racist or whatever, or anti-capitalist, like a recap of the past few years of what's been going on and like in like organizing and stuff. So yeah, I enjoyed it and I would recommend it. The next book that I read was How Strange a Season by Mayhew Bergman. This book is a literary short story collection that I really, really thoroughly enjoy. I think like thematically, a lot of the things that tie this collection together are like the relationships that people have. I mean, that's true for a lot of literature, of course, but specifically like, of course, romantic relationships between people and like the complicated nature of that, especially in regards to like family and work life. There's this one story about a woman who is in a complicated sort of relationship with her like ex or something, and she's a terrarium designer, like she's a plant designer, and she is building like this tropical set for like a photo shoot or something. There's a short story about a woman who is in like a lesbian relationship whose partner is going on an environmental sort of like trip for her research. They're both like researchers in environmental fields. I think like a lot of these stories also deal with the pressing reality of our contemporary life and like reality that is the looming environmental crisis. She basically goes into this town to like try to ask people to like eat this type of fish so that they can, or this type of like sea creature so they can get more of the sea creatures out of the water because it's not like native to the area. And she meets this guy who she's like staying with who has a complicated like family legacy, and he's known as like the town nut. And that is a really interesting thing, and I think like that also points to another larger theme within this short story collection, which is like dealing with your family history and legacy, and especially in America. And a lot of these stories are set across like the American South, or some of them at least, sort of like what it means to be the recipient of or fall within the legacy of or inherit a family past of enslavement, and like what that means and how you like deal with that, and like, you know, your past and your ancestors. And there was also a really compelling story I think in here that was about these two people who are both like competing for the same or interviewing for the same like professorship position at a university for a like climate change, like environmental studies position. And that was so interesting and such a fun story. That was also, of course, like dark in some ways. I really enjoyed this. I rated it 4.5 stars. I think the last story in this is sort of a novella. We follow one family and the different perspectives within this family on this plantation throughout the course of several like centuries, like generations essentially, and the way that in particular times and settings some of the relationships fall apart, or like how the idea of like saving face or presenting yourself to the community in a certain way, or like class and gender and romantic and sexual relationships and family and legacy all intermingle together on this like one plantation. And it was fascinating. These people feel so real, and I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was very solid and very good. And then I read another short story collection called Ghost Lover by Lisa Taddeo. I read her book Animal like a year or two ago. I thought it was okay. It sort of follows out the current contemporary literary trend of like the crazy woman type thing, and Ghost Lover does too. There's some moments of it that I was like, this is like kind of needlessly like racist, and I kind of get it because, you know, it's from the perspective of various people that we're not supposed to like, but I don't know. And I just didn't really like this. I did not find it memorable or compelling in any particular way. I rated it 2 stars. I was just kind of like, it doesn't have to be like this. I don't know, like it wasn't that enjoyable to read, and I didn't find the characters to be things I really wanted to latch onto, and it wasn't that interesting, I guess. I don't know. Like, I think the way that she writes these like heterosexual, complicated and toxic dynamics is in such a way that like doesn't have the nuance or like emotional sort of substance or like capacity or sentiment that is necessary for me to really care the way I did with the Bergman short stories, that I was just like, I don't really fuck with this. So yeah, I rated it 2 stars. I thought it was like kind of below mid for me. I don't know whether I can read other Lisa Taddeo books. Like, it's just, maybe she's just not for me, you know? The next book that I read was Small Pleasures by Clare Chambers. This book was also not that memorable for me. I rated it 3 stars. It's a like mid 20th century novel following a young woman trying to sort of do an investigative like journalism piece almost, and it's about like how she gets entangled with this woman's life who is sort of claiming that she had like a virgin birth. And the way that everything unfolded and sort of the queer or lesbian dynamic that we kind of see later on, I was just like, this is not as interesting as I think you think it is, as in the author. Like, I don't know. I just found it sort of bland and not as emotionally fraught and tense as I think it wanted it to be. It's inspired a little bit by like the true story of an actual real life like tragedy and event, as well of like a train crash and like passengers dying or something along those lines, I think. And it's also very much set in like that newsroom setting of this woman who's like a journalist and whatever. But yeah, I thought it was pretty mid, which is why I rated it like 3 stars, maybe like 2.5 even. So yeah, it's just not that memorable to me, which is why I don't really have much to say about it. But yeah, there's that. And then I read another nonfiction / like theory thing, and that was Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative by Mark Fisher. This book is a pretty short one, and it is, oh, the fridge is buzzing now, amazing. And I rated it 4 stars because I think that a lot of the points that it's making are really strong, and it's kind of like ahead of its time in a lot of ways, and the points that he's making about, for example, like how mental illness is pathologized and medicalized in order for pharmaceuticals to exist in the capacity that they do, as opposed to understanding the looming and overwhelming rise of like rates of anxiety and depression and things like that as things that emerge from like the crisis of late capitalism. And a lot of this is just also forms of like media analysis and looking at the way that capitalism has become so entrenched into our reality, obviously capitalist realism, that we can like no longer even imagine an alternative world or future, in a way that even in the late 20th century there was that possibility. I think there were some elements to it that I was like, there were some political points that he was making that felt somewhat contradictory or like didn't really connect with me as much, I guess, but you know, maybe that's just fucking me. But I also think like, you know, he makes the point that so much of the radical movements of the 70s and 80s and 90s and or like of like the 60s and 70s and 80s were also driven by the fact that like the Soviet Union existed, and there was still an active debate like among young people in America of like, well, is socialism viable and also a better alternative to this, and like how do we work towards that? Whereas now people are sort of grow up understanding that we are going to live in a capitalist world and we have to assimilate to that and work towards it and allow ourselves to acclimate ourselves to that and just, you know, try to survive, even though the impending and ongoing like climate crisis and the crises of like finance capital and such are constantly there, and that's an understanding, and that also impacts the way that like we treat like education. And Mark Fisher, he I think was a professor or something at some point. He's British. The first chapter I think was also very interesting because he opens up with a criticism of, or sort of talking about the movie WALL-E and how it represents that sort of post-capitalist like consumerist landscape or sci-fi dystopian techno world, and also how like that type of media is also a symptom of capitalist realism, anti-capitalist media, because it further entrenches, or rather like it's part of the system that it critiques by being a part of the media like spectacle that is intrinsic to the visual media of how capitalism operates, how because it's so integrated into that and because so much of the individual consumer of media and political thought is seen as itself like political action, it sort of can be substituted as, for a lot of people, like a way of I don't know. I think a lot of the points were like really strong. There were a lot of points that I was like, ooh, this is so good, and I highlighted it. And there are other points that I was like, how are you going to say that the Soviet Union was obviously, like the fall of it obviously closed the window to a lot of, and allowed for what you are coining as capitalist realism, as describing the reality of our situation, but also like constantly using the derogatory terms of like Stalinist or whatever without ever really interrogating it in a substantial way. There's more specific things, I'm sure people have gotten into it, and I know some people, Marxists, and some people that I know and some of my friends and comrades like don't really fuck with this text for that reason, but I do think it had some very interesting sort of media criticisms and conclusions about how capitalism operates and how we interact with it in our day-to-day lives that I thought were meaningful and contributed something to the framework of my thinking, or that made me think, or that I was like, wow, this really resonates. So yeah, I would recommend it. The next book that I read was a 5-star read. It's a contemporary fiction, like commercial book, and that is Iona Averson's Rules for Commuting by Clare Pooley. I think this is her sophomore novel. Her first book is like The Authenticity Project, which I tried to start reading and I didn't really fuck with it, so I stopped. But anyways, this book I really thoroughly enjoyed. It was suicide prevention for me, personally, because it was so joyful and also sad, because we're following these different people who all are on the tube every day, every morning to get to commute to work or school, and it's all people from different backgrounds and ages and different life situations, and they're all drawn together by this woman named Iona Iverson, who is an ex like cabaret ballet performer, dancer, ex it girl, socialite, who's a lesbian and is a agony aunt in a magazine, but she hates being called an agony aunt, so she's a magazine therapist, and she sort of is this older woman who's eclectic and bold that everyone sort of goes to for advice, and it's about all these people being brought together. This like finance guy whose life is kind of falling apart, this girl who's getting bullied at school because her nudes got leaked, this man who is a nurse and he's feeling a lot of stress and panic and anxiety and has an anxiety disorder because of how much empathy and care he has for his patients, and this woman who is in a relationship that she doesn't realize is toxic until it's kind of like too late. There's like these beautiful romances and relationships and friendships that throughout the course of these various train rides and commutes that are so absolutely lovely and delightful to follow through with, and I love the like range of experiences and the amount of empathy that we get for like all of these characters. I thought it was so sweet and charming, and it made me giggle. It was sort of whimsical in some ways and very uplifting in others, kind of in a way that like maybe like Eleanor Oliphant or something is. But I thought it was so adorable and it made me really, really happy. So I'm a Cancer. I'm sentimental, so yeah, 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was a book that I read for an assignment, and that is Daisy Miller, A Study by Henry James. And this is a novella that's like a classic from the Gilded Age, like late 19th century, sort of examining the way that class and womanhood and elite social society and like the rising nouveau riche and Americans in Europe sort of all relate to each other within the context of like men and women like courting and whatever. I thought it was like fun and also tragic in many ways, and it's such an interesting thing to like study and look at in terms of like how misogynistic is this in terms of the actual story versus the reception versus the intentions. And we're in the perspective of this man who's trying to court or trying to go after this woman named Daisy Miller, who's very beautiful but sort of naive, and everyone thinks of her as, or everyone in high society thinks of her as like trashy, but you know, we don't really know, like we kind of figure out why throughout. But I liked it. I thought it was solid. it's a good classic novella, you know? What can I say? And then I read a really short, almost pamphlet. It's like a PDF I found online, and that's One Is Not Born a Woman by Monique Wittig. This is another like piece of feminist, lesbian, like theory almost. And this is, you know, where Monique Wittig, who is a French feminist, French materialist, feminist lesbian from like the late 20th century, she sort of talks about how a woman is not a natural, biological, historical category, but like a political one, and how thus like lesbians are not like women in that way. She was one of like the sort of political foremothers that thought of that concept that I think a lot of lesbians now are really attached to, this understanding that lesbianism as an identity is one that inherently precludes womanhood as it is traditionally understood, because womanhood is so deeply attached to the patriarchal notions of like man and woman and the constructions of those things historically. I think like the first half or the first few pages of this piece were so strong and resonated so deeply. I think she goes against a lot of the sort of like trans exclusionary radical feminist rhetoric of that time, or also even the more bourgeois leaning feminist takes of that time, or just like feminist or radical feminist understandings of gender and the construction of like womanhood and like feminist ideology that she really goes into in a way that I found really compelling. And she, you know, also talks about, of course, like the way that lesbophobia exists within like the feminist movement, and how, you know, that like that type of shit. I thought it was really on point. But then I think in like the latter half of it, she goes into her criticisms of like Marxism and communist movements and such in a way that I was like, I don't think this is true. I don't think this is correct. And I think I understand where you're coming from, but I think where you're coming from comes from a place of like, not misunderstanding, but misinterpretation maybe. But I think like my favorite parts of this, hold on, let me go find it. I think I like tweeted some screenshots from this piece because I was like, wow, like she was kind of, this motherfucker was spitting. Like, how did she know? Like, she really came for a lot of people. Like, she was sort of discussing a lot of the discourse around like feminist and lesbian and like gender identity stuff before the internet, before like people act like it's all new. But you know, that's why we read, because we know it's not new. Nothing is new. Nothing new. Taylor Swift featuring Phoebe Bridgers from The Vault. Oh, I also think I tweeted some screenshots of, I read a lot of the nonfiction and stuff like online on Scribd or in ebooks or PDFs online, so, and yeah, I tweeted a thread of screenshots from Capitalist Realism as well, being like, whoa, so true, so real. Wittig says, lesbians should always remember and acknowledge how unnatural, compelling, totally oppressive, and destructive being woman was for us in the old days before the women's liberation movement. It was a political constraint, and those who resisted it were accused of not being real women. Some avenues of the feminist and lesbian movement lead us back to the myth of woman, which was created by men especially for us, and with it we sink back into a natural group. Having stood up to fight for a sexless society, we now find ourselves entrapped in the familiar deadlock of woman is wonderful. Like, so she's already coming for like the girl boss feminists that, you know, we see now is like, wow, celebrate womanhood, it's so amazing, when in reality like her criticism is emerging from the fact that like woman as a political category is a political category. It's not a natural one, it's not a biological one, it's one that was constructed by men for men. It was constructed by patriarchy for patriarchy in order for it to exist. It exists as a label in order to categorize people to be oppressed. So to lean into that label, to embrace it, or to act as if like it is something to be celebrated or heralded, it's not historically accurate. It's not necessarily like a good political way to lead forward into feminism or into the liberation of women, and also into, as she said, a sexless society, which is basically like the abolition of gender, the abolition of sex, the abolition of patriarchy. Materialist feminist approaches to the logics of feminism of that time that are so applicable to this day. A lot of what she's saying is like pretty brilliant, but again, don't necessarily agree with everything, so 4 stars. And the next book that I read was The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula LeGuin, which is about dreaming. And we're following this man whose dreams are able to shape reality. And this book was such an interesting way of looking at like a dystopian world, but also like a dialectical materialist analysis of how the actual things that we dream, or that this one specific character dreams, can alter the reality of our past, present, and future. And the way that he ends up like in this world, basically it's sort of a utopia, and the utopia is evolving as he dreams, but the government sort of has these individually instated or these like state mandated sort of like psychiatrists and psychologists, and after he's been flagged for abusing like sleep medication and drugs in order to stay awake because he's so afraid of, you know, what's going to happen if he dreams, and his reality is altered by his dreams, which he doesn't want to do because he's almost like a sort of a passive character. He's not the kind of character who wants to change the world in any particular way. He doesn't like it. He gets assigned to this doctor who does want to, and he wants to take advantage. This doctor really wants to take advantage of the fact that this guy is dreaming, and he takes the like machinery that is able to track the dreaming cycles and his sleep cycles and uses hypnotism to try to, you know, not control him, but rather to in this like therapist process to have this relationship that sort of goes in many directions. And it's apocalyptic in some ways, and in other ways it's very much just an interrogation of like, what does it mean to just let things happen versus try to enact change into the world, and like these sort of opposing ideologies or like ways of interacting with the world and like philosophies of life almost. And Ursula Le Guin is absolutely a brilliant science fiction writer, and this book is no different. And I really picked it up because, well, Sunbeam's Jess talked about it in her summer books video. I love Sunbeam's Jess, one of my favorite YouTubers. I watch everything she puts out, especially her book videos. She's so brilliant. I think she wrote her dissertation on the 5th season, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I really want to read it. So Sunbeam's Jess, please let me read your dissertation. Anyway, so she was talking about this and I was like, yeah, I should definitely read it. Also because I've been having some really fucked up dreams lately, or like really vivid ones, and I still have been, but especially during, I think, Mercury retrograde, like it was really severe. So it was so interesting to like read this as well while I was in that actual state in my life, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I rated it like 4 stars. It was super thought-provoking, a very interesting thought experiment. It wasn't fully necessarily fleshed out. I feel like a contemporary novel about this sort of concept would be, because it feels more like, I think Jess talks about this as well, it's sort of more of an extended short story than anything else. And so in that way, because she's really dealing with the ideas of it all, it's not as like plot or character driven, I suppose, which I think defines a lot of like sci-fi now. So there's that. Alright, so then I read The Many Deaths of Laila Starr, the second comic in the series. I read the first one last month, or the month before September. I rated this comic 5 stars. I thought it was fucking phenomenal. I was blown away by this particular edition so much. It was so beautiful and I loved it. So yeah, 5 stars. I mean, I could have just read it all, the whole volume in one sitting, but I think being able to read comics in the increments that they're put out in, as opposed to through the collective volume, is something that was helpful for me in reading Laila Starr, because it's just so dense and rich and both humorous but also so deeply emotional, because we're dealing with like this goddess who is in this bureaucratic world of gods, and she keeps on dying and being reborn within like 5-10 years of time, and like having to interact with mortals in the world in their doings, and she's like uniquely tied to this one mortal or this one boy who's been assigned to be the guy who brings about like immortality or whatever, because she was the goddess of death, and she was like basically like, okay, the gods were like, bye, we don't need you anymore. And so that sort of instigates all of this. So I don't want to spoil the rest of the comic series. So yeah, the next book that I read in the month of September was NSFW by Isabel Kaplan. This book I rated 4 stars. I thought it was really solid. It's another new release, like literary fiction, depressed woman moving, like a millennial woman type of story, which you know I love, and I really enjoyed this. It's following this woman who is working in Hollywood as a assistant to like producers and or a writer or something like that for a broadcast television network, I believe, and it's really about how she is navigating this 2010s environment of like workplace gender discrimination and sexual harassment and assault and like the culture of that, as well as like her own personal family dynamics and how that's impacting her like work life and her relationships, because she has a really complicated relationship with her mother, who is a rape lawyer and like a victims advocate sort of lawyer who is very well known and has been for many years, because she had a very infamous case that was highly publicized, and ever since then she's been like a very high powered lawyer. And so much of like their relationship is very much rooted in like her mom being like, I gave up everything for you so we could move to LA so that, you know, you could pursue your dreams. But her mother has so many mental health issues, and so she's so tied to her mom in that way. But she is also really feeling like lost in her own life because she's so caught up in her work environment that like she doesn't have the time or capacity necessarily for other relationships in her life. And I found it really interesting and compelling in terms of how it's dealing with like how misogyny like works in this industry and the politics of like victimhood and being a survivor and sexual harassment and rape and interpersonal like work dynamics and being a woman. You know, she's a Harvard grad, she is very smart and aware of the privilege that she holds and aware of the identity that she holds and how that affects her. And it's a very much a 2010s type setting, which I think was so interesting and a very like compelling choice to not set it in a vague or contemporary time period, because I think, you know, it's sort of the lead up to Me Too, or in the midst of it, we see the consequences of what's going down within her own production company when the director, the president of the company is this like woman who is questionable in a lot of ways, and how as the company sort of falls apart in some ways or others, and how her work is taken credit for or not, how much she wants to be removed from her mom but can't be. It was really interesting and very much like a mommy issues type of like LA story that I enjoyed, but you know, I don't think it was as good or like not, it wasn't excellent in the way that I think some of these books really hit for me. So yeah, it was a 4-star read. The next book that I read was Sea Girl, Feminist Folktales from Around the World by Ethel Johnston Phillips. And this book is a collection of sort of short story adaptations or fairy tale translations and adaptations from around the world, of course. This author or this editor like scoured through a lot of different fairy tales to find narratives that really centered women in a substantial way and compiled them all together. So it is like very much just fairy tales from different places about different characters. You know, there's not that much there, but because it's just fairy tales and sort of her renditions of them in a way that's very cut and dry and to the point, but it's solid. I love a fairy tale, so yeah, I rated it 3 stars. Then I read the 3rd rendition of the Laila Starr comics, which I rated 3 stars. I didn't think it was as good, but then the 4th rendition, it was 5 stars. I was like, this shit is, it made me cry. Like, it was so wow. Because, of course, we're dealing with death thematically throughout all of this, but, like, this one really got to me. I don't know. Okay, and then the second to last book that I read in the month of September was Simple Passion by Anne Ernaux. This is a small novella translated from the French, and it's about a woman in, like, the late 20th century who is caught up in this illicit affair with this foreigner, and she never names him. I think she just calls him the foreigner, and she is the other woman in the situation. She's like totally obsessed with him, and all she can think about is him. Her whole life revolves around him, and it's about her in the midst of this relationship and the aftermath of it, and then of course all the things that are happening in the world throughout this, like what's affecting her. And I think it was really cathartic for me to read, and it was so interesting to be in the mind of this sort of like middle-aged woman who has this complex, and like her trying to figure out or trying to grapple with like being in this position and like feeling like a desperate, lonely woman, and also being a writer and being like, wow, you know, the structure of this book is like, I'm writing this, I don't think anyone's gonna read this, like I feel embarrassing trying to put this out into the world, but you know, I'm gonna write this anyways. And it was very, very short, so yeah, I thought it was solid. I rated it 3 stars. And finally, the last book that I read was Suture by Nic Brewer. I rated this book 4 stars. I thought this was very, very interesting. I read a lot of strange books, I read a lot of weird fiction, and I think this is one of the weirdest books I've ever read. It's very much a book about books, a book about writing, a piece of art about making art, someone who is an artist writing about being an artist, because in this world, like, there's this physical, bodily, gruesome body horror element to art making that is sort of the standard for artists. So it's like genuinely this physical manifestation of the self-flagellation that goes on in trying to make art, right? So like all painters and all artists have to like remove their ribs or to use their blood or stuff like that, and that creates like, there's like a black market for that. There's like, and it's so interesting, we're following these different perspectives. This one visual artist who's the daughter of a visual artist, this woman who's a filmmaker, and she is a lesbian in this really beautiful long-term relationship. We follow her through the course of this relationship and how her as a filmmaker, part of the work of a filmmaker, she has to take out her physical eyeballs to put them inside the camera, and how doing that over the years has taken away her ability to see color, and then eventually her ability to see it all. And then we also follow a writer whose writing, like, of course, also comes from her blood, and she is really desperate for, like, success and accolades, and it's really affecting her relationship with her husband, who is an agent for other writers, and he is very patient, or not husband, her partner. And it's so interesting to see all of these different artists whose, like, actual physical bodies are impacted by their work and what they make, and how that affects their relationships to other people, and how they talk about their art making and their processes, and you know, how they got to that place. It was pretty damn fascinating, and in some ways, like, it made my stomach churn because of the explanations of how people in this world like make their fucking art. But I also think, like, of course, the way that it explores all of those themes was pretty, like, artful and interesting in a way that I have not really seen been done before. Of course, there's some moments that I was like, okay, this is a little on the nose, like, thematically it is a bit, like, on the nose, like, you know, but I still think it was wrought in this way that was, like, very much felt like going into a gallery or going to a talk with a famous director, you know, and we're in the minds of those people. So yeah, that was all 24 of the books that I read this past month. Sorry for getting this route to you late, and again, sorry for being sort of MIA for the past few weeks / month. I've been so busy and losing my mind in so many ways, but I hope you will forgive me. And I still have some videos backed up from when I was filming in St. Louis, so if the setting is different for other videos or they sort of alternate, that's why. And yeah, that's all I have for you today, I think. You can follow me on my social medias if you want to see that insane part of me as well and keep up with me in that regard. You can friend me on Goodreads if you want to see my updates on my reading in live time. And yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you in my next video, hopefully. Okay, bye.